We are here for this episode going to be finally really interfacing with and kind of dealing with head on the topic of artificial intelligence in higher education. Obviously, there's a lot of applications and a lot of implications, but we'll kind of just be doing a sort of very high level perspective on the way that AI is impacting higher education at this current moment. We are recording this for the record in August of 2023. If there's other seismic changes and shifts and things in the future, just let that be noted. Just really grateful for our guest jumping on to kind of give us sort of this, exploration, kind of start our journey here on this show so we can kind of add our perspective to the mix as, everything kind of unfolds here. So, Mark, if you wanted to give a brief introduction, kind of summary, elevator pitch of who you are, and then we'll talk more about the work that you're doing and specifically dealing with AI.
Awesome. Well, first, Dustin, thanks for having me on your show. I've been an entrepreneur for about the last 20 years, primarily in education technology. Started a company called Optimal Resume, where we sold resume building technology into the career centers of universities. Then I started another company called Brim, which was really a communications platform, very similar to Slack, but really geared towards the higher education community. And Brim, what we found was that students were asking the career center the same types of questions over and over again. And that was our epiphany moment for why don't we create a chatbot for higher education that can help answer questions about whether it's admissions related, but all the way through the student experience to career services. I started this company in 2017, and currently we're working with about 200 higher education customers.
Yeah. I kind of wanted to break that down a little bit too as we kind of explore what Ivy.ai does is like that even just in the times, since 2017 that you founded this venture and everything, like so much has been happening in this sort of space of how you sort of like integrate something like that from just, I think the baseline of you kind of just build sort of a knowledge based repository that is sort of pulling from based on the inquiries to now sort of this moment of really elevating that and sort of stacking upon that foundation to really make something like a chatbot work kind of even smarter. So I guess, yeah, just explain briefly what Ivy.ai does and maybe even just kind of chart that over the past few years.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good way to talk about it is to chart it. So if you look at sort of the early days, the 2017, literally through 2022, Ivy was so there's basically two different types of chatbot technologies. There's retrieval chatbot technologies, and then there's generative. Generative has been in the news a lot lately. Ivy started off as a retrieval based chatbot. And essentially, what that means is that Ivy has a data bank of stock answers. And then when someone asks a question to the chatbot, we try and find the best stock answer, and then we fire that answer. And so that's a retrieval based chatbot. About a year ago, Ivy saw the writing on the wall with what was happening with OpenAI, and we decided that we needed to pivot into a generative space. And so the way that Ivy works now is rather than retrieving stock canned answers from a knowledge base, instead, what we do is we read in or ingest, if you will, all of the knowledge of one of our customers. So, for example, like an admissions office, we'll read in their website, we'll bring in all of their PDF files. And then there's several layers of AI. There's a level where when someone asks the question, we're finding the best content across all of their assets that would be the best response for that question. But then we're using generative technology to repurpose that content in a way that's contextually relevant and sensitive to what that person asks. And so Ivy has become a generative chatbot over the last year with our flagship product, Ivy Quantum.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's really exciting is I think we've gotten to a place where, at least in my perspective, like the value, the kind of utility of just like a chatbot on its own sort of merits of just that kind of retrieval model that makes a lot of sense. So there's just so many use cases. Obviously, like I think anybody's kind of interacted with all of those on any company's website, but then it's just finding higher ed. There's obviously so many different offices or resources that a student might be wanting to try to find or find information about or anything like that. And it's like you could, pretty build a pretty robust and sort of useful knowledge base, but it would be theoretically kind of limited to just sort of like just call up response, pretty simple thing. So it's like, how can we, build upon that now. So I guess specifically, with that more generative model that you mentioned, that's obviously just where everything's kind of going, and certainly, where you're kind of leading, or kind of leading the way here. Just to kind of summarize it, I guess, in the simplest sense, as we start to zoom in, like, what are just some of the benefits you've seen for institutions leveraging this technology? Because I think just like that might be some of the resistance. Hey, the thing we have is working fine. You think? Convince me, like, sell it to me. I got, like that. It feels like it's like you're clicking into a completely different sort of, just perspective on what is, even just possible with a tool like this.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways to think about the benefits of generative technology from the perspective of the customer itself and the perspective of the end user. So, if we think about the customer itself, think about the school. So, the first thing generative technologies do for a school is that it dramatically reduces the implementation time to build a chatbot. So when you're building a retrieval chatbot, you're literally trying to think of every answer that you could possibly have for a student, which is a terrible use of time and energy. And instead, what you're doing is you're essentially saying, hey, crawl this website, read this document. So the building process for the chatbot becomes a lot more straightforward. The second thing is that maintenance of the chatbot becomes much easier. So every day, the idea behind this generative approach is rather than have two sources of truth, your chatbot and your website, what we want schools to do is make their website the source of truth, right? And so what we want is anytime the chatbot gets stumped, we want to try to bring that answer back onto their website so that the next day when we crawl that content, the bot has that information in the bot's brain. So, from an implementation and maintenance perspective, generative technologies make schools' lives a lot easier. Now, from just the chatbot experience in general, what we have found since moving to a generative model is that so we ask students at the end of every conversation to rate their experience, right? Give it a 1 star to a 5 star rating, where five is the best. What we've seen after launching the generative approach is that we're getting 3 times as many 5 star ratings as before. And so so what does that mean exactly? So the first thing it means is that we have better coverage we cover a lot more content than the retrieval model. So the bot has a lot more knowledge in it, which makes it more effective at answering questions. But also the fact that it's contextually relevant, where I could ask a follow up question and it will keep the context of the conversation. It's just a much more human, enjoyable experience than those kind of constipated, forgive the expression, experiences that retrieval based chatbots have, where it's just spitting out answers at you that don't sound human. And so at the end of the day, what that does is it improves outcomes for students, right? They can get the information that they want, which helps them either pay their tuition or break some barrier that they were trying, which ultimately will help with retention rates and graduation rates. But we've also seen generative technology be very useful on the admissions side in generating essentially new leads as prospective applicants for the school. And so putting this engaging technology on the website, for example, at the University of Oklahoma, their freshman class increased 10%, and they attribute some of that increase to the chatbot technology.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, amplifying your kind of bandwidth, really. Like, that's just the simplest way to put it, where like you say, like, kind of like, the limiting, your colorful metaphor, but the idea that, like, yeah, like, if prior to this you'd be hitting a lot of walls that would be sort of, restrictive, limiting, just any of those sort of like active, feelings and words there. And then, almost just unleashing, a chatbot and that utility to be more comprehensive versus like if you just had a blind spot with whoever sort of owning the development or, building that knowledge base or something. And, not just being able to anticipate every permutation of how somebody could answer or ask a question so you can try to answer it. And yeah, I mean, it is really exciting because I think I'd imagine maybe if kind of as like a quick follow up, like I'm imagining there are some people where just that premise of the maintenance or sort of the limitations of like a retrieval model, they're like they didn't feel like, even though it was probably better than what they were doing before, like they didn't really have as much bandwidth as they could have or should have. Like the idea of having to build and maintain a generative or a retrieval bot was not appealing, a generative one would be appealing because they're like, wow, like that's just going to be so much easier to set up and maintain and stuff. Like, do you feel like that was kind of the case that like, retrieval wasn't quite there for some people, but then when generative is sort of proposed, it's like, oh my gosh, yeah, okay, that was more of what we were looking for.
Exactly. So, one of the major problems with retrieval based chatbots is that information gets stale, right? So, when you think about a school, information's dynamic, like dates are always changing, classes are always changing, people are always changing. It's a very dynamic, fluid situation. And essentially, when you have a retrieval based chatbot with static answers, it can start giving answers from 3 semesters ago, information that's old, out of date, and that obviously causes another set of problems, which is, obviously wrong information, which could hurt the brand, and it could obviously negatively influence a student outcome. And so really what the it's generative technology sort of reduces that dependency on managing these two knowledge sources, and instead it's like, okay, let's just focus on our website or our knowledge base as that source of truth, and then have the chatbot be slave to that and almost act as an advanced search utility to find that information and then repurpose it in a more human way. And so the retrieval sort of methodology for chatbots is going to be a dying breed for sure. There are always going to be certain use cases for retrieval. For example, like Ivy uses retrieval technology in certain cases where personal information is required. So, for example, if I was a student and I asked, what is my account balance? In that case, well, we're going to use a retrieval response because we're ultimately going to call an integration to connect to the student information system to pull that information back in. So the best chatbots are going to be the chatbots that have generative technology that are going to really improve the implementation, maintenance, and performance of the bot, but also retrieval based technologies for those edge cases where you want to deliver that personal experience and retrieve information that is specific to that end user.
Let's play a game. What keywords does your website rank for? What doesn't it rank for that you think it should? What are a few opportunities you could be winning on if you tweaked some website copy? Okay, how'd you do? Not great? That's okay. Because our friends at DD Agency want to answer all of those questions for you and then some. DD Agency is a higher ed specific marketing technology agency that has conducted countless SEO audits for colleges and universities across the country. In these audits, they detail where you currently rank, what you could be ranking for, exactly how copy should be tweaked on website pages, and much more. If this sounds like something you could benefit from, give those folks a ping and be sure to mention that Enrollify sent you to claim a 10% discount on any of their SEO offerings. Head on over to enrollify.org/DDASEO or simply follow the link in the show notes below that will guarantee you a 10% discount off of your audit. Again, head on over to enrollify.org/DDASEO to learn more. Now, on to the show.
Yeah, that's a good clarification. Yeah, the idea of having the best of both worlds where like there's going to be that database that's kind of like a separate system that you can kind of plug into to get that information versus just like the publicly available website and stuff. Because I remember years ago when I was like playing around with the building a knowledge base for a chatbot in a prior role, like they we were kind of working through some of that stuff of like, oh, well, you don't want to like reference like in the answer information's going to change because you have to keep updating it. But then it's like you would end up just like pointing to a website or something anyway. And then it's just kind of that idea of like clicking now of like, well, we could just have it learn from that website that you're updating anyway and not having to just like send somebody out. No, they're just getting the answer like there, whether it's like, you're texting it or it's in an app or the website or wherever else, somebody might be interacting with something. So, um, yeah, it's really, really fascinating to see that. Cause yeah, I mean, I think just the idea of like focusing in on the student impact, like that idea of just at worst walls, like they're hitting walls, getting incorrect information, or it can't get an answer. So they still have to wait, or kind of at best, like friction of having to like jump around still to like different places to get an answer. Cause it's just like, you can find the whole list of this or that here. It's like, hopefully they could just like get the answer and be able to, yeah, pay their deposit or register for classes or pay their bill or do whatever else. So, and yeah, I mean, like, I think it's always just pretty well proven of like a lack of awareness of resources or just like, you hit friction enough, like any of us sort of bail out of like completing a survey or doing whatever it might be that we're doing. So, yeah, I mean, like the just greater student satisfaction, the greater student retention, and more, completing applications and those sort of things. So I think, yeah, I guess any other maybe like anecdotal examples, I guess, that you can see of just like AI elevating, the work that you're doing with institutions, of just sort of those impacts of things that kind of come to mind. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think of it as really AI is kind of a force multiplier for schools. And so I can see it. I can see it helping schools at a number of different levels of the institution. So, for example, I with Ivy, our most common success story is sort of the improvement of customer service. Right, so the ability to deliver accurate, unbiased answers and to do it very quickly and use the underlying knowledge sources is a huge benefit to schools because they don't have to have someone answering emails or on the phone or just handling a queue in an office. And so there's definitely a reduction we've seen for that customer service need, which allows our schools to focus on more high impact items, right? Really helping someone troubleshoot. And so by sort of taking the tier one stuff off of their plate, they're able to really dial in and perform more value added services. So it's in much of the same way that a bank teller in the 80s and 90s, as we moved into ATM world, started talking more about mortgages and less just doing the simple transactions. So they've become much more consultative. And the same thing is happening at schools, where rather than just handling a tier one, they're performing more advisory services. The other thing I've seen in addition to that is the efficiency of responses. So, one of the channels that Ivy has built a utility for is the ability for the chatbot to respond to emails. And so, if you think about what you want to try to do is you want to try to triage the traffic from the sources where it's coming from, right? Website, chats, calls, emails. And so we built a plugin for Outlook and for Microsoft Outlook and Gmail. And essentially, when a student or someone emails the faculty member or staff member at the school, the bot can generate an automatic reply. And so what that ends up doing is it becomes a huge time saver for them. So rather than having to refer to the underlying document where they need to retrieve that knowledge to answer the question, the bot will actually generate it and then they can edit on top of it. So what we're seeing is that, from the customer service perspective of handling students, there's a lot more volume, but also as an individual service provider, our schools are able to get through a lot of those student requests faster because of this generative technology. And so we're also seeing in the AI starting to be used in the classroom too, which is going to be sort of the next evolution, I think, of the big movement of AI in higher education.
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of definitely want to head towards the future, I guess, looking towards the horizon. But like, I mean, that's exactly like where my brain was going, was that sort of saving time. And if it's replacing anything, it's replacing just the rudimentary questions you get, several times. And it could be 24/7 immediate responses versus having to have things get like bottlenecked with certain staff members. So it's like, it's replacing, yeah, that low level stuff and augmenting. Because I think it's just that dynamic that I think people are sensitive to, of just, oh, is it going to be like, replacing all the staff members or something? But it's like, no, it's just like elevating what you're able to do, being more consultative or whatever. And that, like, yeah, like so much of higher education is that like customer servants sort of like experience that students are having, of just being, you know, made aware of what's available to them. They understand how to take advantage of them, and just getting questions answered. And then, like you said, like, understandably so, that like the academic experience and sort of faculty interactions, there's been a little bit more, I think, of certainly, yeah, that kind of protectiveness or sort of skepticism, and just kind of figuring out how to make it work. But even just that idea of like, getting connected with the tutor or navigating an LMS or like certain things like that, there's definitely like a pretty clear path. And it's just, for each institution and their leaders, I think, to be intentional about where they want to sort of plug this in and sort of utilize it, and maybe just sort of roll it out over time versus kind of forcing it on everybody at once or something, or however that might kind of play out. But yeah, I mean, just the ability for these staff members to kind of use their expertise and their experience to work with students on a more kind of, the word I'm looking for is, but just like kind of a deeper basis is just really powerful and just saving time and money and everything. Like you can kind of crack this nut, I guess, in a lot of different ways of like whatever's going to kind of resonate, and if there are pain points that a particular institution is facing. So I guess, yeah, like to build on kind of what you're getting at, like as you're looking towards the horizon, certainly academic experience I think is one area that we'll see a lot more development of AI in higher education, but just anything else I guess that you're sort of seeing through your work with the institutions on this front.
Yeah, I'm starting to see. So I think that schools are focused on the low hanging fruit right now. And the low hanging fruit, I would say, is more of the non-academic areas of the school, right? The admissions, the financial aid, the registration, the bursar, those types of areas they're essentially cost centers for the school. And most of the interactions that they have can be automated. There are obviously some that require human intervention because they're difficult. My point is that while schools have addressed this kind of low-hanging fruit, what they're seeing is that this technology can be useful in other areas of the institution related to learning. And so, for example, like right now, Ivy is working on a partnership with one of our customers where we're building a bot based on lectures. So we're uploading 25 lectures, we're uploading the PowerPoint decks that were associated with the lectures, the syllabus, reading materials from the class, and then we are building a bot that students can ask sort of the routine mundane questions about what's due and due the next class schedule, but they can also ask questions about American literature and questions that are deeply rooted in that professor's knowledge and expertise. And so I do see that there's going to be a trend in the academic areas, but I also see the possible scenario of having companion apps, right? So imagine a situation where you arrive as a freshman at a university. Say, here's your friend that's going to be with you for the next 4 years. And so think about that generative sort of interaction where you could walk a person through orientation all the way through their career services experience at the school and be there as an academic assistant, be there as if you're having a bad day and you need a little love, using a bot in that capacity. So I think there's going to be opportunities for individual sort of companion apps that will be your digital assistant that will be with you throughout your schooling experience. And so I can see a bunch of different futures. And then ultimately, I do think about, this case where there is AGI. So where there's artificial general intelligence, where an AI knows everything. And so what happens when an AI can teach a class? Right? Like that, those are really uncharted territories. What does that mean for a school? What does that mean for their brand? What does that mean for their faculty? There's a whole new world out there that's sort of bubbling up, and it's unclear, but it's really exciting about what that could look like. And so I'm really interested to see how the future is going to unfold.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's no shortage of kind of like use cases in that area of like what could it either kind of help develop for us or facilitate for us or support with and everything. But I think, yeah, like the near future is that idea of like it's not just like, okay, chat gpt that's pulling from the entire internet. It's like, no, I'd kind of want something that can kind of contour around the academic experience that we're trying to curate here for a student, where it's like, yes, I developed everything for this course as a faculty member. Like, could it just pull from the book that I wrote that we're using for this course, or all the resources that I put into the LMS or something, and it's just like pulling all those up versus being like, wait, was that module 2.13 or something that had that definition of this thing? Like, you can just ask it and it knows what the faculty wants their student to know about that for the exam that's coming up next week or whatever. Like, so I think that's a interesting sort of clarification of just like how a AI chatbot or anything else would be sort of introduced into that sort of experience would be really tailored toward that particular uh experience that the faculty is creating for their students. So yeah, and I mean, I think that idea too of you're seeing just like yeah, AI art, or you're making a voice that sort of is saying something or whatever. Like, yeah, there's like all these things where it's like we're just like at the early stages, and I hope that people don't get, I think we've seen, I guess, a fair share of it, of like too alarmist, of just sort of like the sky is falling, what's going to happen, or whatever. It's just like, all right, let's just sort of examine and scrutinize and sort of just like, see what we can do with this. We're at sort of this like sandbox stage of just sort of playing around and stuff. So yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot more to see for sure over the coming years and everything. But we will wrap up though, as we always do. And certainly, if you want to kind of put some reference to anything that you'd want to, reference for folks to check out to learn more about this. But just final thought, call to action as we wrap up the episode.
Yeah, I mean, so from my perspective, my advice to schools on a go forward basis, starting as soon as possible, is to get your data ducks in a row, to really take advantage of the AI future that is knocking on the door. You're going to want to have really good data, and then all of the AI will be powered off of that data. So it's going to be important to get your websites organized, your knowledge bases organized. And then I would highly recommend partnering with an AI expert who can be your Sherpa through this adventure that we're all going through together. But I definitely think it's going to make sense to have industry partners that can take the data management practices that you've put in place to really extract as much value from those assets for the stakeholders of your schools.
Yeah, I mean, that is a powerful call to action. It's just like, just get started with partners and experts and champions and all those other folks that can sort of help get started somewhere, is kind of been one of my lines that I keep saying, where it's like, yeah, like start it in just one particular office that is like receptive, or sort of has maybe been, doing some research and building their expertise. And then, certainly folks like yourself who are doing the hard work to build all the kind of, software to do this. So certainly appreciate the work that you and your team are doing, and you just for jumping on and sharing all that you did for this podcast here. We'll have ways to connect with you, and it's really great chatting and kind of solidifying some of my knowledge. And I know that for, be the case for other folks listening as well. So yeah, just thanks so much for hanging out.
Thank you, Dustin. Appreciate your time.
Hey, all, Zach here from Enrollify. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, admissions, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks that are all designed to empower you to become a better higher ed professional. Our shows feature a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Learn from Mickey Baines, Jeremy Tiers, Jamie Hunt, Corinne Myers, Jamie Gleason, and many, many more. You can learn more about the Enrollify Podcast Network at podcasts.enrollify.org. Our shows help higher ed marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea. Find yours at podcasts.enrollify.org.